Good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Rabbi, you never answered my question today.
Okay, ask me now.
Oh, okay. You know the guarantee to heaven mitzvot. You know,
What
a
is
man
that?
abused by his wife makes it to heaven automatically. Someone giving enough charity makes it to heaven automatically. I wanted to ask you if if a person is an atheist,
Yeah.
but he or she shows unequivocal solidarity to the Jews.
Yeah. You're talking about a Jewish person?
No, I'm talking about an atheist.
Is Jewish or is Goy?
No. No.
What? He's a Jew or is a Goy?
He's a Gentile. I mean, I
A
didn't
Goy.
know
Okay,
that.
he's a Goy. Okay, so yeah.
Why? Does it make any difference if you're a Jewish
Yeah,
atheist?
just
you
just curious what you're talking about. I'm just curious.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah.
Okay, so then what's the question?
My question is, if you're an atheist, but you show, tremendous solidarity to the Jewish cause or to the Jewish people,
Yeah.
What happens? I mean, I don't expect you to.
It's not going to help you. It's not going to help you.
Oh, it's not going to help. I see.
No.
I see.
Whether you're Jewish or not Jewish, it's not going to help you.
I see.
Because atheism is like considered to be like a red line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a red line. Okay. Yeah. God bless.
God bless.
All right. Very good. So we'll get started. Okay. But anyway, so we're starting a new chapter here. We're almost done, basically, right, with the laws of Matza. So then we'll get started with the other laws of Passover. But anyway, right, it says over here in the Torah. Sorry about that. Yeah, so it says in the Torah here, Lo yil'os adam chitin beitnan al gabe makato. So it says, right, that a person should not chew wheat and then put it on his wound. In those days, right, this was like a dressing that they used to make like this, putting wheat on the wound. So he says, right, that it's not a good thing to do. Why? Forbidden to do that. Because the saliva does cause leavening. So you don't want to do something like that. Okay, so let's see Bet Yosef on that one. So it says the Bet Yosef, what's the source for this? Mishnah Perek Kol Sha'ah. It's in the Mishnah there, Lametet Amud Bet. So basically, what are we learning here, right? That saliva will cause wheat to leaven. So don't drool over your wheat, right? Whatever it is, right? Make sure you don't do that. Okay. So let's see Shulchan Aruch. So it says the Shulchan Aruch here, לא ילעוס אדם חיטין וייתן על גבי מכתו. As we said, right? You shouldn't chew the wheat, because when you chew it, it'll get saliva on it, right? So this is the problem. מפני שהן מחמיצות. Why is that? Because saliva does cause leavening. שירוק מחמיץ. Okay, there you go, right? That's the story. Simple, very simple. Let's go on to the next one. So it says in the tour like this: הנותן שעורים לבהמתו ומצאו בהם ריר צריך לבערם. Oh, another issue, right? Which is similar to that. What about if you, right, give barley to feed your animals, and you come back, right, and you find on them, the mucus, right, from the animal, right? It's like a saliva kind of thing. The saliva of the animal, right? It's called the rir. So if that happens, you gotta get rid of it. Why? What does that mean, get rid of it? You gotta destroy the chametz, burn it, whatever it is, right? Or flush it down the toilet, right? Whatever you want to do, it's up to you, right? But the point is, right, that this will also cause, right, the chametz to leaven, the saliva of the animal, right? Whatever they call that stuff. So yeah, same idea. So let's see the Bet Yosef on that. So Bet Yosef brings the source for this. כך כתב במרדכי, it's in the מרדכי, בפרק אלו עוברים, right over there. בשם רוקח. So there you go, right? That's the source for this, right? So again, we'll do the Shulchan Aruch. Right, so 1, 2, 3. So it says, הנותן שעורים לבהמתו ומצא בהם ריר, צריך לבערם. So again, right, that we're saying, if he gives barley to his animal, and he found, right, the saliva on it, whatever, of the animal, so he's got to destroy that barley. So what do we see from here, right? That whether it's the saliva of the human or the animal, it does cause leavening. So you got to be careful. Got to get rid of that stuff. We already talked about, before, right, to something similar, which is the mouse, right? What about the saliva of the mouse? So, we also said it's a problem, but the thing is that with the mouse, it's like a very little amount. So, it may get nullified, if it's before Passover. But this is like a larger amount, you know what I mean? So that's already, a bigger problem, because these animals are large. They're not little mice, So they have lots of saliva, whatever you want to call it, right? Yeah. So says the Rama here, אבל מסתם אין לחוש הואיל וכבר בטל. ויש מחמירים לבאר כל הנותר מן הבהמה, אף על פי שאין רואה עליו ריר. So right, so says the Rama something interesting, that, to augment this halacha, he says, what about, if you came back, right, and there was no saliva on it, so do you have to destroy that too? So he says, not really, right? According to halacha, you don't see the saliva of the animal on the barley, you don't really have to destroy it. But then he brings another opinion, right, which is, he says that those are stringent also with that. So why is that? Because there may be some saliva there, maybe you don't see it, right? So therefore, right, good idea to get to destroy that too. Okay, well, what can I tell you, right? We don't really, none of us really have any barn animals, right, on our property, so we're not really worried about things like this. Yeah. Okay. So we're not going to get into this too much. Some people, have dogs, and they feed their dogs. But the truth is, that most people are not feeding their dogs chametz. Usually like dog food or something, which is not really chametz. Could be, you never know. I don't know what's in that stuff. God knows. But anyway, right? if you do have a dog, his saliva also will do the same thing, obviously. So you got to be careful, with that. If he's drooling over your chametz, you got to be careful. Your doggy. Okay.
Is pet food considered something you need to, look into and get rid of?
I'm sorry, what was that again?
Does a person have to get rid of their pet food?
Yeah, so if it does have chametz, what he should do is buy some alternative food, for Passover, something alternative.
Okay, so it's not exempt because it's not like people wouldn't eat it.
So here's the thing, right? That the rule, what's the funny thing, right? Exactly, you made a good point. The funny thing is that when we measure, right, how spoiled is chametz, before it becomes permitted, how spoiled does it have to be, right? Because spoiled, if it's totally spoiled, it's not called chametz anymore. But what's the gauge, right? What's the barometer for that? The barometer is, will a dog eat it, right? Will a dog eat it? So that if your doggy will eat that dog food, right? Then you got a problem. So therefore, right, you got to be careful about that. So you should if you have a dog food, which is or cat food, which has chametz, right? So you gotta find an alternative. All right, that's the story, pretty much. Okay, yeah. So you would have to get rid of it, or sell it, right? Whatever. Okay, so
If you sell it, can you still feed it to your dog?
no, it belongs to the goy. You'd be stealing.
Can the goy feed your dog?
Well, he doesn't want to. That's the whole thing, right? When you yeah, I know what you mean. I understand what you're saying. But usually, what happens is like this, right? That we sell it to a goy. This goy doesn't know what's going on in your house. You know what I mean? He has no idea. So he doesn't want to feed your dog. He's not interested in feeding your dog. But here's the thing, right? If you have a neighbor, let's say, right, who's a goy, whatever, somebody close by. So then, right, you wanna, I call it, you wanna, you wanna sell to him that your chametz, right? By the way, not so good to do it that way, because you have to know how to do that to sell the chametz, and if you don't know the halachot of doing selling the chametz, better not to sell to a neighbor or something like that. You know what I mean? Unless like you have no choice. Better to do like do it through a rabbi or do it through some organization or whatever. Because selling chametz is a little bit tricky. There's some issue. We have to. There's laws about that. We have to talk about that, right? That's a different issue. So I'm not going to get into it now, right? That's a whole discussion in itself. But generally, right, when you sell something, you can't touch that stuff because it doesn't belong to you. Otherwise, you're stealing. you know. So there's a lot more details. If you're talking about somebody, a goy who's close to you, that's a little bit different there. Okay, so we're not going to get into that now, right? It's complicated a little bit, but let's go on. So yeah, you got to be careful, when you sell the chametz to a goy, not to use that stuff, in any way because it's not doesn't belong to you. Okay, so what you got to do with that, is you got to put it away somewhere, in some closet or cupboard, and put a sign on it, this way, right? People will know not to touch that stuff. You know what I mean? Whatever. Just put like a little, piece of paper on it, whatever, or something, and say, right, that it's chametz, stay away from it, whatever. Same thing also you can do, if you have some like, perishable stuff, which it has to be in the fridge or in the freezer, So what you should do is, like label it chametz, and then put it in the fridge like separately, so this way people won't touch it. This is the way to do it, pretty much. Okay, good. So yeah, good idea to sell chametz, through reliable channel, somebody who's God-fearing, rabbi, knows how to do this stuff. Otherwise, you can get into all kinds of issues because, you have to know how to do that. It's a whole discussion. Anyway, let's get back to our discussion here. So we're going to Gimel. I just found recently, like when the COVID thing started a couple of years ago, right? Several years ago. So, like you couldn't go to shul. The shul was closed, the synagogues were closed. So, we were selling our chametz online. You know what I mean? So I found that the Rabbanut, in Israel is doing, was doing that service at that time, even for people who live outside, in the diaspora. So I did it, that year. I sold it like that. And then what happened was that, I found that after COVID ended, they continued doing this service, So now it's become like every year they're doing it. So, it's pretty good. Just do it online, Right? It is what it is. So some people prefer to do it in person, because they say you should make a kinyan, you should make an acquisition, this and that. Whatever. The truth is, it's okay, if you don't really have like a good person to do it, personally, so you can do it online, no problem, as long as it's somebody reliable. Okay, so going back to the tour, let's see what's going on there. So says the tour. Katav Rabbi Eliezer Migarmiza. Right, this rabbi, right? He says sak melo kemach, right? So what does that mean? It's a sack full of flour. Shenatan etzel achoma, and he put it right next to the wall. V'nitlachleach meziat achoma. Oh, so he says right that it got wet. From what? The moisture that that the wall excretes. So he says machamitz. That stuff will cause leavening, right? So you got to be careful with that. So he says, therefore, if water fell on the flour, or let's say, right, the sack got wet. So he says, what he should do is let him sift out, right? The flour, and the rest will be allowed. He says, what about if a little, right? He says snow or a little rain fell on the grains, right? What happens there? So he says what you can do is, take out, remove, right, the top layer. But he says the bottom layer you can use, if it was just a little bit, right? Not too much, right? It wasn't like a big, pouring rain, just a little drizzle, whatever. So if it was just a little drizzle, he says, just remove the top layer and the other, whatever is below, you can use. Okay. Interesting. So let's see Bet Yosef over here. He brings the source for this. All right, Harosh Perek Kol Sha'ar Agot Maimon. From the Rosh, he says, also Agot Maimon has it. Katvo le'atir b'lechluchit zi'at hachoma k'divrei Rosh. So he says, right, this rabbi, he was allowing this. So what does that mean? He was allowing the moisture from the wall. He didn't think there was a problem. So he said, Kedira Rosh, like the Rosh. Okay, interesting. So the Rosh seems to argue with this rabbi, right? Rabbi Eliezer Migarmiza. Right? He seems to have a different opinion. Okay, so let's see how the Shulchan Aruch paskins. This was Gimel. Okay. So he says like this, right? Shulchan Aruch. Sak malek kemach shenitlachleach mizyat hachoma. As we said, right? You have the moisture from the wall that moistens the makes the sack with flour wet. Mutar. So it says it's allowed. V'yesh osim, and some forbid this, right? So in other words, he seems to paskin like the Rosh who allows this. And then he brings the other opinion, right? As a minority, whatever, like right, not the halacha, right? So yeah, basically that's the story there. The Rosh allows the moisture from the wall. Okay, interesting. Question is why? Let's see if the Mishnah Berurah explains, right, something about this. Interesting. Let's see what he says. What's the big idea here? So first of all, he says, right, the Mishnah Berurah, we're talking about a wall which is made out of wood, right? And the wood excretes moisture. Okay, interesting. That's the first thing he says. Then, let's see what else he says here. Okay, so Mishnah Berurah explains something interesting, right? He says that the excretion that comes out of the wall, the moisture, it's not really considered to be like water per se. It doesn't have the din of water. And this is the reason why it doesn't leaven. That's what he says. Explaining the Shulchan Aruch. Okay, well, that's good to know. Again, right, not so practical. We don't have things like this today. But anyway, right, it is what it is. Okay, let's go on to Daled. Hopefully we can finish this chapter, right? With God's help. Okay, so says right Daled. נפלו מים על קמח. תלכלך השק, ויאכל בידו. So let's see the bit Yosef here. says בית יוסף, כתב מרדכי, פרק כל שעה. It says מרדכי, מעשה בא לפני רבנו יצחק מוויאנה. Oh, Vienna. So we have Rabbeinu Yitzchak, right, who comes from Vienna. You know where that is, right? In Austria. Al sak kemach shenafal letit. And so it says, regarding a sack of flour, and falls on it some mud. So it gets some mud on the sack, right? Of a Pesach, right? No, so you understand what the problem is here, right? That these sacks they had in those days, they were not waterproof, so the water got through them. And this is the reason why we have these discussions. Because if they were like waterproof, like nylon, or plastic, so then there would be no question, right? But these are not waterproof. The water goes through, permeates. So this is the reason why we're talking about this. וציווה להריק השק ואמר שיש לנהל הקמח כדי שישאר לכלוך למעלה וזה יזרוק והשאר מותר. So he says, what do you do in a case like that? Right? You have mud that gets on your sack, right? So he says, what you do is, right, you empty out the sack. And then, right, do it in a way, manipulate the flour in a way where the wetness, right, the moisture will stay on the top. And you'll throw that layer out, the layer which got wet. And the rest of it is allowed. The bottom part, right? The lower layers. Right? Mutar. Bekach davka kol zman shehu meluchlach. So he says that's only if it's wet. Aval ima amad hasak ad shenityavesh alachluchit. But he says if it already, stayed there, right, like that, the sack, until it got dried out from its moisture. Lo mehane nihul, the mifrach, right? So he says because then, right, if it got to that point already, it won't help you anymore to remove the top layer. The mifrach b'nichnas im hashar velo yishar lemala klum v'chametz bepesach mimashu. So in other words, what he's saying is like this, right? If it already dried out, that means that it already permeated below. So therefore, the whole sack is forbidden. That's what he's saying. וצריך לקח קמח אחר לצורך הפסח. So he says, therefore, for Passover, you got to take different flour, right? That flour is not going to be suitable for Passover. וזה ינהלנו, אם ימצא כמו עיסה, זה יזרוק יזרוק וישר וישמרנו עד אחר הפסח. So he says, then, right, what you can do is, after Passover, remove the top layer and eat the rest. דווקא אם מתייבש קודם הפסח, that's only if it dried before Passover. אז יכול לשמרו, then you can keep it. אחר הפסח, after Passover, תחמץ שלו בזמנו ונותן טעם. So he says, because the chametz which was before, right, before Passover, it's going to be kosher, it's going to get nullified in 60th. וכאן אינו ניתן טעם בכלל, בכל כיוון, it won't give, here it says it won't give taste in all of it, כיוון שנמהל, שמנהל אותו, because he's, removing the top layer. אבל פסח דאיסורו במשהו, but he says when it comes to Passover, where, if you're doing it on Passover, so then, as we said, right, it doesn't get nullified. So therefore, you got to throw everything out, right? The whole sack has to go. Okay, good. So that's interesting. Let's see the Shulchan Aruch on this. Dalid. So it says Shulchan Aruch like this. Naflu maim ala kemach. So he says, right, that if the water, as we said, right, falls on the flour, or it got wet, right, the sack got wet. יאחז בידו כל המקום המלוכלך בשק עד שיריק כל הקמח שבשק. So he says, okay, so what do, right? You hold the top layer, right, in your hand, and the rest of the sack you empty out the other layers, right, the bottom layers. So he says, if you can't do this, right, for some reason, you don't know how to do whatever, you can't manipulate it like that. So he says, what you do is you're going to sift out the flour and the rest will be allowed. How does sifting help you over here? This is the question, right? Anybody know how does sifting help you? Sifting the flour. So I'm guessing, right, like this, that the reason why sifting helps you is because the stuff which got wet will not go through, and it'll stay on top. So whatever sifts out did not get wet. So, it'll be kosher for Passover, right? It'll be not chametz. You following my trend? So that's why it helps you to sift it out. Quite a job. Okay. Right, v'davka kol zman shehu meluchlach. So that's only, as we said, right, if it's moist still. But it says, but if it got already dried out, right, it's not going to help you anymore to sift it out or whatever, to do all this stuff. It won't help you. Why? Because it already permeated below, right? So there's nothing to do there. The mifrach מתערב עם השער ואסור לאכלו בפסח. So it says, therefore, you're not allowed to eat that stuff on Passover. So what do? Right? Do you have to throw it away? Not really, right? So it says, אלא ילכדנו וישמרנו עד אחר פסח. So what do? Right? Sift it out and then save it for after Passover. You know, ואם נתייבש בפסח אסור להשותו. But it says if it got dried on Passover, though, that's a different story, right? Then you have to get rid of it. Because it doesn't get nullified, right? So it gets nullified if it was before Passover, it got wet, But if it got wet on Passover, I said then you have no solution. You gotta throw it away. You gotta get rid of it, right? You gotta destroy it, whatever. So yeah, that's the story. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll go on. Okay. So we're going to Hay. Which is where? Huh? Oh, here we go. It says Bet Yosef, כתב מרדכי פרק בקורשה. Says מרדכי, רבנו מאיר כתב על העכברים שהטילו מים רגליהם בחיטים. We already discussed this before, right? It seems like it's coming back. What about the mice, right, that got their saliva on the wheat? Right? דאפילו לאמור עוקבא דאמר לא נתבקעו ממש הכה אין לחוש, right? So he says, even according to, right, he says here we're not concerned about that. Why? דקרוב הדבר לבדי דמי רגליים אין מחמיצין. Oh, I'm sorry. No. I didn't. I'm sorry. I didn't say it right. It's not the saliva here. It's the urine of the mice. Ichs. Pretty disgusting, right? But what can we do? Right? We gotta mention it. The mice urinated on it. Oh my god. Pretty gross. Okay. So anyway, right? So he says we're not concerned. Why? Because he says probably urine does not leaven. Oh God. Teim hayu מחמיצין היו כל החיטים מבוקעים ואף אגב בפרק כמה דבכורות. So he says if it was true that it does leaven, then the wheat will be cracked. So he says the first פרק בכורות גם במי רגליים כאמר מאיה איל מאיה נפיק מכל מקום אין לאסור אלא אם כן יראה ביקוע. So he says therefore, right, the rule is like this: if there's urine, right, on the wheat, right, pretty disgusting. Right, I hope you're not eating dinner when I'm talking about this stuff, right? Hope you finished dinner already. So what is he saying, right? He's saying over here that unless the wheat is cracked already, which shows that it's leavened, it doesn't, it's not going to be indicating that it's leavened. ורבנו ירוחם כתב דמי רגליים מחמיצין. So, but this rabbi, right, says Rabbeinu Yerucham, he says that urine does actually leaven. Right? Yeah, well. The dam katav de'eno machamitz, right? What about blood, right? So he says blood doesn't leaven. Kak katav berchot chaim. That's what it says in Orchot Chaim. Katuv od sham says also further there. Dechol toldot hamayim kegon me'apach ve'achotem ve'ayin ve'ozen u'meraglayim machmitzin. Oh, look what he says. Interesting, right? So he says, what about all the, all kinds of fluids in the body, right? Like, for instance, right, mucus and, the moisture from the eyes and, the ears, right, the earwax and, all these things. Also, he says the urine as well. So he says they all do actually leaven these things. So there's, machloket here, right? Some say that urine does leaven and also all the bodily fluids as well. Well, good to know, right? Pretty gross, but okay, right? Yerushalmi atel mechamitz, right? So says Yerushalmi that dew. What about dew? Does dew leaven, right? So he says Yerushalmi says yes. Hatal mechamitz, right? The dew does leaven, right? The dew is water, so right. Why shouldn't it, right? Pretty clear. right? דין אם נתערבו חיטים שיש בהם חשש חימוץ עם חיטים אחרים, היח יתבטלו בסימן תנ"ג. So it says, what about the issue, right, that if two types of wheat got, mixed up together, right? One which is, there's concern that it got leavened and it got mixed up with wheat which is not leavened. So, how does that get nullified, right? He says we talked about that in Tafnun Gimel. So yeah, okay, it doesn't describe it over here. How that works, but anyway, let's see the Shulchan Aruch on this. Shulchan Aruch, right? Hatal machamitz, right? The dew does leaven. V'chen meraglaim, right? Also, right, urine. Umehape, right? Also saliva, right? And the mucus from the nose, right? All that stuff, right? Ve'ayin ve'ozen, right? Also, the liquid from the eyes, the mucus, right? And from the ears. So all these things do leaven, right? That's the halacha, according to Shulchan Aruch. Well, there you go. Right? And says the Ramah here, or somebody who wrote a gloss over here. He says, "V'chalav v'ziyat adam eno machmitz." Okay. Oh. So what about sweat, right? So he says over here, sweat does not leaven, right? I think we talked about that already. Yeah, we talked about that yesterday. About perspiration, right? The Rosh talked about that. Okay, so he says over here, right, that sweat does not leaven. And what about chalav, right? But the question is this chalav or chelev? Let me just make sure which one it is. A second. Chalav or chelev? Okay, so Mishnah Berurah says it's both. In other words, halachically speaking, they both do not. So what does that mean? Whether it's milk, right? Chalav is milk, and chelev, right, in Hebrew means fat. So he says they both do not leaven. There you go. Okay, now you can sleep easy, right? Okay, you get a good night's sleep now. You know what's going on. Very good. Okay, so that's the story there. We have one more and we're done. Vav. Here we are. So let's see the tour in this also. There's a tour here. Kemach shenafal lo. Yeah. Okay, so there's like a whole tour over here. So the tour says like this. Sak sheyesh bo kemach, right? If you have a sack which has flour, contains flour, v'yashvu alav ternagulim, and the chicken sat on it. So it got moist, right? Mitzuatam from their excrement, right? So what happens over there? Eno machamit. So it doesn't leaven. Miu irakeda batzek, right? But it says you should sift out the moist stuff, right? Get it out of there, right? Lechutz ve'ashar mutar, and the rest will be allowed. Okay, so then he goes on. Basar yavesh shemazia b'shat geshamim. So he says, what about dry meat, right? which gives off fluid, right? That juice, meat juice, right? In the winter or whatever. Machamitz. So he said that does leaven. Mikoach hamayim sheudach bo, because there's water in there, that it was already rinsed, right? That meat was rinsed out. So there's water in there, so it will leaven. Then he goes on, chalav shenishpach al gav chitin. What about milk, right? That got spilled on wheat? Doesn't leaven, right? So we already said, like I think yesterday, if I'm not mistaken, right? That chalav is considered like fruit juice. Same thing, doesn't leaven. The chashiv meperot is considered to be like, as we said, right? Fruit juice. עד כאן. מה שדימה זיית החומה לומר שמחמיץ היה מסתבר לאדוני אבירוס לדמותו לזיית אדם שלא מחמיץ. So he says, right, that the Rosh says, just like the sweat from humans does not leaven, same thing applies also to the the moisture from the walls, as we already talked about. כתב עוד על מה שהתיר לרקד הקמח שנפל עליו מים כולה גדולה היא. So he also says, right, the Rosh, that regarding sifting out the stuff which got moist already, he says it's a very big leniency. The Rosh says, לעשות כך בתוך הפסח, to do this on Passover. On Passover, right? That's already too much. As we said, right? You shouldn't do it on Passover. שחמץ במשהו, because it doesn't get nullified, as we said, right? On Passover. כי שמא יעבור עם הקמח חמץ כלשהו בנפה וראיתי מורים הלכה. So he says, therefore I saw that some are telling, some rabbis are telling people, practically speaking, למעשה שיאחז בידו כל המקום מלוכלך בשק עד שיריד כל קמח שבשק ויחי עדיף תווה. So he says, right, that they tell you, right, how to do it, to hold it, as we said, right, and to empty it out, and the wet stuff will stay, in the sack. But we already talked about this in Shulchan Aruch, right? We said that we can do this if it's before Passover, but if it's on Passover, right, we said that we should not do this. Right? So then it goes on, right? So now this is what we're talking about here, right? Our current discussion here. We just caught up with the tour a little bit there. So it says, right, that what about flour, right? And fell on it like some drizzle, some water dripped on it, right? Dripping, Afilo kol hayom eno ba lidei chimutz. So he says, even if it's dripping all day, right, it will not leaven. Interesting. והוא שזה הדלף תורד בלי הפסק ואופנו מיד כשיפסוק אם הוא מסופק אם הדלף תורד או אם לאו אסור. So he says, what are we talking about? The reason why, right, the drip, from doesn't cause the leavening of the flour is because it's causing the flour to be agitated, like moving around, it's like hitting it, it's like boom, 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 boom. So because it's being hit, with the drip, so it doesn't, it's like you're manipulating it like that, so it doesn't cause it to leaven. He says, but he says that's only if the drip is like really strong. That it causes like it's hitting the flour, and causing it to be like moved around, kind of, whatever. But if not, he says, if it's not that strong, right? It's very weak. It's not really hitting the flour, so then it will be forbidden, he says. Okay, so let's just see the Shulchan Aruch and we're done here. First Bet Yosef, I'm sorry. Bet Yosef. So says Bet Yosef regarding this, Beperek Kol Sha'ah, right? It's over there in the Gemara. Lametet Amud Bet Tanya, it's the Braita. Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Kemach Shenafal Alav Delef. So he says, right, that flour that fell on it, some dripping water, right? Afilu kol hayom, he says, even all day, kulo eno ba lidei lechimutz, it will not leaven, or even all day. Amar Papa vehu de'avid tif. So that's only if it's doing tif, right? So what does that mean, tif? Can I get tif, right? So in other words, it's like it's a constant drip, boom, 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 boom. It's not stopping, right? But he says if we're not sure if it's like significant like that, then right, safek the right to we have to go stringent because of it's a doubt from the Torah, right, about leavening. Katav Ran, says the Ran, Piresh Hara'a, the Ra explains B'Shem Rabo Raman, name of the Ramban, the lav lememra shemesh sharui alidei maim Eno machamitz. Doesn't mean, right? It says that which is soaking in water will not leaven. Mishum tiftif, because of the dripping. Ela lomar dehai lav tiftif asur. The elav tiftif, because it means to say that if it's not dripping like constantly, right, continuously, it's forbidden. Because even if we don't see that it's soaking in water, hakol asur, it's all forbidden. So that's the way of the flour. It absorbs the moisture. So therefore, it's like considered like soaking in water. But it says if it's like all being agitated all the time by the dripping, hitting it like that, right? Drip, 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 drip. So then, right, he says, it won't allow it to leaven because it's agitating it. Whatever is not soaking, though, right? That's what we're talking about. The shov klal, it won't allow it to absorb it all. So he says, but it's not really so clear. So in other words, it's a little bit of a tricky thing here, right? This whole thing. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch how he describes this, because it's kind of like a little dangerous, according to what he says here. Okay, depends on how it's dripping. You gotta make sure how the drip is progressing there. A little hard to ascertain that, right? So we'll see, right? What Shulchan Aruch says. Okay, says Shulchan Aruch, kemach shenafal alav delef, right? So you have flour, and it's dripping on top. Afilu kol hayom, even all day, says nobody dechimos. You won't leaven, or even all day. That means, but that's like it's constant drip, right? So it keeps on agitating the flour. Doop, 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 right? Doesn't stop. So and then when it stops, he says the dripping, you got to bake it right away, otherwise it'll get leavened. But he says, you know what? If he's not sure whether the drip is like being agitating the flour, asur, then it's forbidden. Right? Interesting. So okay, let's see what Mishnah Berurah says here. We'll stop there, right? Just want to see how he describes this. If he has any nice ideas about this, right? To describe this. So he says, right? It's a doubt from the Torah. That's why we have to be stringent if it's a doubt. Okay. So let's see what else he has to say here. Mishnah Berurah. So look what it says, right? He brings here the Pri Megadim, the Mishnah Berurah, who says, right, something which I was also concerned about myself. He says, right, that we don't really know, today, nowadays, right, how strong the drip has to be, whatever. We're not really sure how that works. So therefore, it says the Pri Megadim, we should be stringent about this, and don't use flour like that. Makes sense, by the way, We're not really sure how that works today. I don't know. I'm not really sure myself. But anyway, right, it is what it is, so if you know what you're doing, I guess you can be lenient, whatever, It's a constant drip, which is agitating. I personally, I'm not really 100% sure, how that works. So I think I'm gonna be stringent, So if I have flour which is dripping right on it, I'm not gonna use it. Doing that. Okay, very good. So Bez Hashem, we'll finish with this chapter. Be blessed with wealth, health, and happiness. Thanks for coming. Chazak Baruch Leila Tov. We'll see you tomorrow, Bez Hashem. Not tomorrow. Tomorrow, Shabbat. Right. So we'll see you Sunday, Bez Hashem. God willing, next week. And we'll finish the laws of making matzot, and we'll go on to the other laws, right, which are pertinent. Okay, Leila Tov, all the best. God bless.
Thank you so much. I'm not gonna sleep well knowing how they found out that earwax leavens.
Okay, well, I hope I hope you're not sleeping at the airport, Michael.
No, I'm at home.
Okay, you get home. Okay.
I had to leave at 4 a.m. and I could not get a cab, and I own a taxi company.
I thought maybe you were sleeping at the airport. That's why you worried about the earwax.
No,
Okay.
no. I won't use a tortilla for my pillow if I
Okay,
do.
God bless. God bless. All the best.
All right.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
All the best.